Alrighty, howdy folks. This is the study guide for test 2. Essentially, we're just going to be going through some terms that you need to be knowing. I'm not going to spend uh, enough time to go into each term specifically. This is just me making a study guide for you and giving you ideas of what you should be thinking about and maybe how to interpret these terms so that you can do well on your test. Alrighty, so when we're looking at economics, these tests here, they are cumulative, meaning we have stuff from last semester. So one thing you're definitely going to want to remember is incentives and who do they impact. Okay, I'll let you answer that question yourself. I'm actually going to try to get this to be as big as possible. Okay, so incentives and who do they impact. There's this idea of opportunity cost. You're going to want to know that idea. It's very important. I'm going to go ahead and remove the space there. You're going to want to review the law of supply and the law of demand. Okay. Of course, just going over this really quickly, right? Incentives, they matter, they impact everybody, right? They're why we do what we do. Opportunity cost, it's the next best thing that you could be doing when you make a decision. The law of supply, when prices go up, people want to supply more. When prices go down, people want to supply less. The law of demand, when prices go up, people buy less. When prices go down, people buy more. You should also look at why people trade. Yeah. You should look at how does trade create wealth. Ooh, here's a fun one. Why is competition important? Right, of course, trade creating wealth. People, people trade because they end up better off, and trade creates wealth because it enables two people to, when they trade, they're both becoming better off. Otherwise, they would not make that trade, and this leads to wealth creation because we have two people being made better off, and resources being put into the hands of other folks that value them more. And then we look at competition. Competition encourages people that sell things to sell a better version of it, or to sell the best version, or at least the best service. And then it also encourages them to keep lowering their costs, which will save us as a society. It will save our resources because resources are scarce, and it'll also lead to lower prices for consumers. So you're going to want to be familiar with these, the shifts in supply and demand, right? What can shift supply and what can shift demand? Remember, supply, it's largely about the how much it costs to manufacture an item. If it costs more, supply will decrease, meaning shifts to the left. And if it costs less, supply is going to increase. The supply of that item will be more, and it'll shift to the right. Yeah. For demand, however, demand has to do with how much people want it, right? Because this can be due to all sorts of the goods. I'd recommend go back and watching the video or looking at the notes if you are unfamiliar with shifting demand, as there are quite a few things that can shift it. Okay. So let's do this. The effects of price controls, right? And this is going to lead into two things, which is shortages and surpluses. Yeah? Is that how you spell surpluses? There we go. Like, that looks so weird. Matter of fact, I'm going to... That way I can get rid of that ellipses there under it. So shortages are what happens when there is much more being demanded than there is being supplied. And surpluses occur when there is much more being supplied than there is being demanded. If you were to set a price floor, set a price above the equilibrium price, this would mean there would be a whole lot more people wanting to sell it and a lot less people wanting to buy it. There would be a surplus. We try this with minimum wage, and this actually causes a surplus of labor, or what we call unemployment, right? Some folks would end up losing their job because employers wouldn't want to buy as many hours of labor from people that work under whatever that minimum wage would be, and therefore some people would get a raise. Yeah, but also some people would lose their jobs. Okay. And we can see that we can also see a shortage that occurs when we try a price floor, when the government tries to set a price below the equilibrium price or the market price, and that is due to there being more being demanded at that lower price. And there's also being less being supplied at that lower price, which leads to there being over time a decrease in the amount of housing that's available. So, well, just getting back to this idea, we talked about how do you earn an income? You help people, right? So how do you earn a high income? Help even more people, right? We talked about that idea in the first unit. We talked about this idea of, can the government create jobs? This is fresh on my mind, actually, because, watching the presidential debate, can the government create jobs? We know no, they can't, right? Because the government, when they're creating, right, I'm little air quotes here for those who aren't looking at the screen, when they create jobs, it's the money that they're using to pay those individuals is being taxed from other individuals, or and in doing so, that is decreasing. Those people would have spent that money elsewhere if it wasn't taxed from them, and that would have increased jobs in those industries, right? So if anything, it just moves it from the private sector, and at best is a wash. Doesn't really create jobs, and it takes away jobs from the private sector. How do you know when to partake in an action? Okay. When the costs are less than the benefits, right? So long as your benefits are greater than your costs, you're good to go, right? What if your government still when your costs are less than benefits? I'm going to leave that there, even though I hate it. I'm just going to ignore it. Okay, let's continue on here. We are moving along very nicely. Okay, so the invisible hand, you're going to want to know what this concept is, right? This idea that individuals acting in their own best interest will be enabled to lead to the most efficient use of resources. Yeah. All of us acting in our own, the world doesn't, fall into despair. The world ends up, still on spinning. And matter of fact, it's the most efficient way because the people that know what they need best are actually themselves. Yeah, and they can't do anything unless you can't get anything for yourself unless you help someone else. If you're a mediocre economist, you only think about the immediate effects. However, if you are a good economist, you should be thinking about the importance of secondary effects, right? When we're looking at the result of an action, we don't just look at what will happen immediately, but what will happen in the future down the road, and not what's going to happen in the location that this event is happening, or in this with this one thing that we're changing, but also everything else that may change around it. Okay, so secondary effects are very, very important. We already talked about competition, correct? Yes, competition is important. We already talked about that. Private property rights. That's an idea for the test you will want to know. People, when they're allowed to own what they produce, they are incentivized to produce more, right? So people need to make sure, or if you want people to produce, they need to be sure that they are going to be able to own what they produce. And then there's a great, the Soviet Union farm example. I don't know why I capitalized farm. Right, where there were the private plots that grew a whole lot and the public plots that grew not a lot, right? And it was not because the plots were different, the people working on the plots were different. It's just that they had different incentives, right? Those that are on the private plots, they got to keep what they produced. They produced a lot more. Yeah. So know this idea of the tragedy of the commons, right? There are two examples in the book. We talked about one in class. That was the buffalo, right? No one owned the buffalo, so there was only an incentive to consume it. And then there was... sorry, I'm going to make sure I'm looking at this question here real quick. And they also talked about whales, right, for their whale oil. No one owned the whales, so there's only incentive to consume them, to go out there and hunt whales, right? Thankfully, someone found an alternative to whale oil. Why is it... We already talked about private property rights. Okay, so let's do this. Why is economic growth important? Okay, why is economic growth important? Because when we have economic growth, this means we get more goods and services, and this here's what increases our quality of life, right? It enables us to achieve a higher quality of life, and we have more technological advancements that we get to live a life. You know, if we look at John D. Rockefeller, who lived at the time of, you know, the oil boom, really responsible for the oil boom, and he was the richest man ever. Yet we today, we live way better than him, right? We have AC, indoor plumbing, and all sorts of entertainment that he couldn't even dream of, right? And it's because we've had economic growth. Ooh, so here we go. So private investment versus public investment. Okay, who's likely to make better investments? It is the private investors often make better investment decisions. And this is because when you're a private investor, you have to bear the cost of that being a bad investment on your own, whereas public investors don't necessarily have to do so. Okay, if I'm an entrepreneur and my investment fails, that's on me. So I really want to make sure that if I am investing in something, it's going to be something that is gonna pan out, right? Why this is important. Okay, these two words here, capital markets. Capital is what we use to produce goods and services, and it's important that we have a way for funds to be channeled, or for resources to be channeled, for not just consumption today, but for consumption in the future, right? So if we're going to be able to have economic growth, we need to make sure that we have some way for us to channel those resources into these capital markets, where we can produce objects that aren't just for being consumed now, but also to enable us to produce more, to consume more in the future. So let's talk about money. Why is money valuable? I'm going to spell this out. Why is money valuable, right? Yeah, for a large part, guys, because, you know, think about this. We don't have to barter. We don't have to trade item for item. Instead, when I want a haircut, I can teach you folks, and then I can get money from people that want me to teach you guys, and then I can go and buy a haircut. I don't have to go find a hairstylist that wants to learn about economics. Yeah. So money is valuable because what we call that is a medium of exchange. It enables us to trade indirectly. Yeah, it enables us to all go pursue this one thing, and then because we pursue this one thing, we can trade that one thing with one another. That one thing being money. Here in the U.S., it's dollars, right? We already talked about how money reduces transaction costs. I'll go ahead and write this here on the study guide. Reduces transaction costs. Inflation. So know what inflation is, right? Which is money losing value. Okay, and this leads to higher prices. And of course, if this is happening very quickly, if prices are increasing very, very quickly, then it becomes very, very hard for people to trade. You know, I'm going to be afraid to accept someone's money if I feel that money is going to totally lose its value, and I'm not going to be able to buy anything with it later on. And it also makes it hard for other people from the outside looking into this area that's experiencing super high rates of inflation to be like, man, why would I invest in that area if all the money that I'm going to earn from that area is just going to become worthless? Yeah. So inflation is not a pretty picture. It reduces the value of the money, how much it can purchase for you. Okay. We've already talked about price controls. Ooh. Regulation. What does this lead to? Right? Well, when it's more regulated, yeah, you're going to see less of that item being produced. Yeah. So we're also going to see less of that item being bought. They give the example of regulation in the labor markets in Europe, where it has become very, very costly to fire employees. And because it's a lot costlier to fire employees, that also means that it's a lot costlier to hire them, right? If you're going to have to pay this person that you fire 6 months after you fire them, you're really going to think about who you're hiring then. You're not going to be able to take as many risks on individuals as you would otherwise like to. So this has actually led to higher unemployment rates in those areas. They have this idea of the economic freedom of the world index. They talk about this in the book a lot. There's a whole conclusion of part 2 that's dedicated to it, but I think they also mention it throughout the rest of the book as well. But this economic freedom of the world index, essentially, when you have the government taking less money and providing less goods and leaving it to the free market, and they're enforcing contracts even-handedly, and they're protecting your property rights, and they're enabling you to trade with people that aren't just within your country but also outside your country, that's going to lead to your country having a higher economic freedom of the world index. And as they demonstrate in the book, this higher economic freedom of the world, the higher your index, the higher your number is, the more economic growth there is occurring in that country. So then the opposite of everything that I said would reduce that number, right? And then therefore reduce your growth. Because the idea is the reason why they created this number was because it allows them to show a correlation between countries that are relatively more free, they tend to grow faster, and countries that aren't as free tend to grow slower. Let's see here. So if we do not trade with foreigners, what happens? Well, the first thing that happens is we have less competition domestically, okay? If we do not trade with foreigners, what else will happen? Well, because we have less competition, there's going to be higher prices domestically. We're going to have a less efficient use of resources. We're going to have less gains from trade. Another thing that we didn't talk about in class, and that I'm probably going to talk about even with my in-class students as I make this the in-class version of this. The other thing that's going to happen is foreigners will not have as many dollars. And if they don't have as many dollars, what does that mean, guys? Foreigners will not buy as many U.S. products, right? So that there, I mean, we talk about how we don't want to trade with foreigners because we want to save jobs, but in this case, and this is one way that we can see it, guys, one of the reasons that we have jobs in the United States isn't just to make things for us here, but it's also to make things for other countries, so they can buy stuff from us. Okay, so the foreigners won't even have as many dollars to buy U.S. products. So we talked a lot about in this class why you look at all these things, oh my goodness, when we don't trade with foreigners, all these bad things happen. So why is it that trade barriers, trade restrictions will come in? If trade restrictions lead to all of these bad things, why do trade restrictions come in? That's because politicians can gain from them. So how can politicians gain from restricting trade? Well, they gain the support of a special interest. Okay, this could be like a steel industry getting a tariff. This could be like we talked about sugar, how there's a quota on sugar where there can only be so much sugar that enters the United States, and the rest of it has to be produced domestically. So the politicians that support those get the support of people that make steel. All the laborers, all of the businessmen in the steel industry, or in the sugar industry, all the people that grow the sugar, harvest the sugar, whether they're a common laborer or a businessman or woman, they're now supporting this politician, which will help them get reelected, right? So you got to ask, what about everyone else that has to pay more for sugar? What about everyone else that has to pay more for steel products? Well, yeah, it does cost them. As a matter of fact, the total cost is greater than the total benefit to that select interest group. But the benefits, giant he support, that should be gain the weird. There we go. This is because the benefits are concentrated in the special interest. Okay, so the benefits are concentrated, but the costs are dispersed among the consumers. Okay, so the consumers, it is costing them more, but it's the first, right? I give the example in class, what if I charged all my students $1 each semester in order for them to be able to take my class? You guys wouldn't face much of a reason. There would be very little incentive for you to go and talk to the principal, because why would you, right? It's $1 over the course of a semester, right? You don't have much of a reason to fight it, but I have a very, very large reason to fight for it, right? So your costs are all dispersed, even though it would cost you guys all a lot of money, but your benefits as students, my benefit as the teacher receiving all of your money as students, right? Your costs as students are dispersed, but my benefit is really, really concentrated, right? I mean, I get almost $100 for all of my in-class students if I do this, right? So I would be willing to go down and talk to the principal and, convince them to let me have this rule in my class, right? I may even be willing to slip them, a $5 bill or so, just so I can make sure that I get to collect all that money from you guys. Don't worry, I would never do that. Okay. We already talked about that idea. Did we already talk about that idea? Did we talk about marginal tax rates? I think I just got done doing the reading guide video. No, we have not. So, increases in, and I'm going to put marginal tax rates here, because marginal tax rates, meaning that, how much, we have taxes here in the United States. We are progressive, meaning that the more you make, the higher rate you'll pay, but you don't pay that higher rate on everything. It's just, as you get into a new income bracket, right? If I'm making $60,000, and then I go into the new, 24% tax bracket, I'm not going to pay 24% on everything. I'm still going to pay the same amount of taxes that I did on my $60,000. But when I make $60,100, well, then that $100, since that's we'll make up a tax bracket. Since that's in the 30% tax bracket, I'd go from paying, 25% to paying then 30%, right? Which means I get to keep less. So you have to think, what if that tax rate increased from 30 to 50%? Well, I would go from getting to keep 30% to only half my money, right? So my incentive to produce decreases. Okay? And this will reduce how much people are permitted to keep, yeah? Because people get to keep, because the government doesn't let people keep as much, okay? So then if we have high tax rates, what will this lead to? Higher tax rates leads to less people working, leads to less people saving. This leads to, less capital formation. We talked about earlier how it's important that people are cutting their consumption now to be able to save for investing in capital that will enable us to produce more in the future. So this leads to less capital formation, right? Because they have less money, they only have the ability to consume now. And this also promotes wasteful uses of our resources in the sense that it encourages people to buy things that are tax deductible. If something's tax deductible, that means you do not have to pay taxes on the income that you use to produce it, right? So in the case of me paying 50%, a 50% marginal tax rate, you know, if I'm faced between, you know, spending $1,000 on a PC for an office that I can just write off on my taxes and not have to pay taxes on that $1,000, or I am faced with the other decision of paying the taxes on that $1,000 and only getting $500, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to choose to buy the PC, even though, you know, there may be something that was much better that I could have bought for $1,000. But because there was that 50% marginal tax rate, you know, I was encouraged to spend my resources in a wasteful way because I was buying something for my home office, right? And of course, there's this here. Should we ever increase taxes during a recession? And, you know, during a recession, this means that the economy isn't doing so hot, means that people aren't producing as much. And really the only way to get out of a recession is to, you know, realize that we've, you know, made these bad investments. And once we've realized what those bad investments are and have pulled the resources out of those bad investments, it's then time to get people to start working, right? So gotta ask, if we increase tax rates and we just said that decreases people's incentive to work, then what do you think? If we need people to go to work and we increase tax rates, that would decrease their incentive to go to work. Yikes, right? So this idea of increasing taxes like they did in the 1930s, right? You know, we were going into an economic recession, they increased the tax rates, and that then put us into a depression. This will then lead to a reduction in how many people are working, a reduction in employment. Okay, guys, this here is the study guide. I will post a PDF of this on Canvas. You can also look at the study guide from the last section as well if you would like. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you when I see you. Bye-bye.